Spent too much time in California. Now I got that Rona. Gotta be alone. Staring at my phone. Gotta be alone.
Gotta be alone.
All right. And welcome back to the thealoneavirus, back from the last episode, but for the first time in this episode. And I'm going to be talking to my friend Gabe, who is zooming in from Los Angeles, which is where I spend most of my time, but I'm not there now. So you are going to be my resident expert for now. Welcome, Gabe.
Hey, thanks so much for having me, man. Really appreciate it.
I really appreciate you talking. This is awesome. I usually have way more intensive notes, but I feel like I didn't put down too much. I'm going to fly by the seat of my my quarantine sweatpants, I think. I assume you've been spending your quarantine pretty comfortable?
Yeah, it's been pretty nice, spending my time listening to a helicopter fly over my house right now.
How many Zoom conversations do you think that helicopter is in right now?
Oh, I would say 90% of the conversation's happening. I would say a couple million maybe. I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, I also live by a hospital. So I've got two hospitals. I got the Children's Hospital, and then I've got another one that's down the block. And I think they're trauma 1 centers. So they're always flying in and out. And occasionally they'll be searching for someone in the neighborhood. So there's always a helicopter. Sure. But my quarantine has been relatively relaxed. I mean, outside of when I have to go out and about. The grocery stores have lines in them, and they're typically whatever percentage of the square footage is. I don't actually know what the rules are, but there'll usually be a line. Recently, it hasn't been too crazy. But other than that, I just kind of hanging out in my apartment. My girlfriend's here, as well as our two dogs. And then to pass the time, I'm making videos or absurd stuff on content for the internet.
Great TikTok videos.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, it's been fun. I think it's been as insane as TikTok and Instagram are. It's been keeping me sane to just make stuff, because I feel like I get too antsy not doing anything. So it's kind of been nice to do that, and also just go to the park with the dogs and kind of run around and do workout in the apartment. But other than that, it's not too crazy, or at least not yet.
Yes. So if you look at the news today about Los Angeles, pretty much everything is talking about how LA is gearing up to be at the point of New York in a couple of days. The huge number of cases within, they say, 3 to 5 days. There was a hospital boat that pulled up.
Yeah.
That docked or whatever within the last day, I think. And so, I mean, what is the vibe like, if you can get a sense of it?
Yeah, it's I feel and I know we've kind of discussed this before, there's been this assumption on people that we'll all make the right or smart decision. And it seems like we continue to just delay the inevitable of what we should be doing in an immediate response. And LA is typically quick to follow, or soon after SF, which seems to be leading the charge in terms of what they're doing on their own. But in regards to New York, I feel right now everyone's our numbers are increasing at a relatively exponential rate, and this was not foreseen despite what the government says. And because of that, and because of there are more available tests coming out, the numbers will just continue to increase and be way larger than we anticipated. So I could definitely see California, which is one of the largest states in the country, the numbers popping up. I mean, overnight, once they increased the amount of tests that were available in San Francisco, went from 38 to 152, which it's not it's just more or less crazy. And I know that today, I think it was, Trump is considering or will consider shutting down Connecticut, New Jersey, and New York like collectively, because those are the three that seem to be, especially New York, as like a hub of where New York is a huge travel center internationally for people coming in. And so it makes sense that those numbers are increasing. LAX is the same way. So I wouldn't be surprised, to your point, that LA will also discover soon enough, once enough people start getting tested, that the numbers will be much larger than we thought they would be.
Yeah. And I have a bunch of friends in LA, and a lot of people have been posting their new testing centers popping up, which is good. But I think, as you're saying, the numbers are they're gonna spike pretty rapidly, I think.
Yeah. And even then, like, the reality of the fact is, like, okay, it's great that we have the testing center or like other available places to get tested, like as we go on. But the people that can get tested are the people that are like showing extreme effects, which at that point they're at a place where they're in poor health, right? And some of the early signs have shown us that if we get the people who are asymptomatic, or the people that are like showing early signs on, and we treat them, they have a better chance of recovery. But unfortunately, there are other people who don't have access or availability to get to those places to get tested to confirm whether it's coronavirus or it's something else. And it's just like we've definitely been able to man the wave, like, through the healthcare system and hospitals right now, but like we're at a stressor, where like a stressing point or breaking point, where when this second, I think, wave happens, it won't be good. But also, be like, the funding too that came through the $2 trillion bill that was just passed is not enough. Like, that's only $150 billion that's available for hospitals and other like medical resource centers. Like, I don't want to make it sound bad, but like it is kind of at that point where it's like, I don't know how much, without knowing exactly what the numbers are across the country, it's hard to say if that money will actually put a dent in or like be a preventative measure against what is currently kind of on the rise.
Yeah. And from what I've seen in LA, it looks like the hospitals are pretty close to their maximum. They're kind of like at their breaking point, and everyone is expecting, like I said, the cases to spike. And with testing, you might we're probably not going to capture the asymptomatic people. That just doesn't seem to be happening at all anywhere, which is ridiculous. But
yeah,
I think there are still, as the cases progress, you're going to get a lot more actually sick people too. And it's going to be a bit of a shit show, I think.
Yeah, I think that it's gonna be one of those things where where we feel like we're prepared, but we're not, right? And I feel like a lot of people are like, "Oh, it sounds so doom and gloom." Well, I mean, unfortunately, we've come to the point where every time before that, like I was kind of mentioning before, is like we continue to delay or assume the best in people, right? Like you give us, you present a scenario to a person and say, "Hey, China, other parts of Eastern Asia, as well as Italy and Europe, are all showing an increase in cases and fatality and deaths due to coronavirus. We should take this seriously." And everyone's like, okay. But the numbers don't seem to be high. But that's also because we haven't been testing people, right? And so that's where, like, oh, surprise, surprise, the numbers are actually going to be larger. And every time that, some news conference or briefing happens, it continues to be like, okay, well, social distance, keep 6 feet away. The amount of days is 14 to 15 days. Keep yourself isolated in your own home or with an isolated cell of people that you interact with, like significant other, family, whatever. But then, a couple days later, news comes out again where it's like, oh, you know what? Okay, that recommendation we gave didn't work out. And like we found ourselves to a point where now the mayor of LA is like, okay, it's going to go on for 2 months of this type of lockdown, shelter in place. But also there are going to be more cases and more deaths. Not that we want that, but it will present itself that way, because when we say, don't go on trails, don't go to beaches, don't go to parks, whatever, you find that people resist that and say, won't happen to me. Or, I mean, like, look at what, spring break in Florida. That is the most insane thing I've ever seen. And now there are a bunch of kids who are showing positive with coronavirus. So it's like people like that, just that don't listen or like disregard as a won't happen to me, I'm going to be fine, or, well, there's no case now. Turns out that it actually makes it worse. And then you got Governor, Newsom, who comes in and says, okay, listen, like, this is why we can't have nice things. You guys ruin it for everyone, and now we have to take it away. And I continue to be baffled at the fact that we just don't just shut it all down, right? Like, if Trump shuts down 3 states right now, like, why did he just add on the other 47 and say, let's rip the Band-Aid off now and do this, because it seems to be the only way that'll prevent us from progressing into, well, I mean, we're already number 1 now, so I guess, we already got that badge of honor. So it's just like, it's and it's, like I said, it's kind of like baffling, but also I just find it like disappointing. I'm just like, just do it. Just go ahead, call it what it is, and let's just hunker down for the next few weeks and allow our medical professionals and those who are at hospitals and testing centers and whatever have time to respond and actually treat those people, right? Those who are actually symptomatic, and then possibly move back in the population to those who are potentially asymptomatic. But we don't even have test kits. Though I did just read that LA is partnering with UPS to deliver test kits. And I think it was like 5,000 test kits right now or something like that. There was the US naval ship that docked in to deliver beds, which is great to hear. But it's also finding the physical place to hold, right? Like, where do we put them? I know there was talks, I don't know if I'd never followed up, but I know there were talks of having the LA Olympic Stadium as a potential testing center, because it's so large and it's an unused space. I don't know if they ever went forward with that, but I know that was at least a possibility of housing a large group of people.
Interesting. Yeah, and from what I read, at least one of the ships not only brought beds, but I think it's actually going to act as a floating hospital.
Yeah. Which is great to see, but it's just like, I feel like the responses that we've had so far are like too little, in many ways, to at least prevent what's happening. And now it's more, it continues to be this reactive thing. And you see it in other cities. You see it here in LA. And I don't know, it's kind of like, why is there a delay in the necessary response to actually take this thing seriously? I mean, I'm obviously, now everyone's taking it seriously to an extent, but it just kind of, again, baffles me at why the necessary measures weren't taken in the first place, and it costs us more money and a longer time. And
well, if you well, I wanted to respond to a couple of things you said, but
yeah.
So you said you wondered why the other 47 states weren't just thrown in as a precautionary, like, let's just lock it all down and get ahead of it. And
Right.
The same thing's happening over here where I am in Pennsylvania, is like they're going county by county, even though the Pennsylvania governor is pretty on point. I like the stuff that he was saying the other night, but he's still like, all right, well, these are like Philadelphia County, Bucks County is right outside of Philadelphia. We're gonna put some regulations on these counties, but everything else is fine. I'm just like, do the whole state, man. Like, we need to shut this down.
Yeah.
But Trump is talking about strategically sort of relaxing guidelines in other states where there are fewer cases that aren't captured. But you're saying, like, why aren't they just locking it all down? I mean, if you look at those states, those are his states, and there's obviously a correlation. Yeah. So he doesn't want to put a damper on the economy for his
I
own.
look at it. I know. It's also, it's like we're entering we've got the Democratic primaries that are obviously were happening / on hold now. There's that whole like replace Biden with Cuomo kind of situation that's kind of like beginning movement, which is crazy. But yeah, for Trump, it's, you know, it's a strategic move, I think, from a political way of thinking, and not, it's like it's not holistic in any way, is the way that I look at it, right? Like holistic would be like, okay, we're going to shut everything down. Yes, the economy will be at a standstill outside of these essential destinations, facilities. But I think it's like he slowly rolls it out and being like, okay, if I hold off on this one state or this one area where I know is going to, you know, benefit me politically later on, I don't want to screw things up for them. But by doing so, it will extend and cause I think a ripple effect in a larger kind of pool, as opposed to just being like, okay, let's just shut it down. Yeah, it sucks right now, but if we can handle it, then we're good. But if you do the slow rollout, then you still have people like, I live off of Vermont, and, you know, it's a relatively busy street. And as soon as the shutdown was originally kind of set up by the LA mayor, it was relatively quiet, like first couple days. Yesterday, there were cars up and down the street. And to Michael, I'm like, I don't know where you guys are traveling. You know, you guys are only, maybe you're an essential kind of worker. Maybe you're a medical professional. Maybe you're going to a grocery store because you're on a job or whatever. But it's like, outside of those people, like, I don't know where you guys are going. And without a national kind of like shut it down, we are making this thing progress further, because people are continuing to be like, well, I can't go to a beach, or I can't go to a parking lot to, you know, I'm just still going to travel. And it's like, well, it's not good.
Yeah. People are, especially in LA, you don't have a lot of big picture people. It's pretty self-involved. You know, that's the
unfortunately,
stereotypical LA person.
Right. But it's definitely proven to be true in this scenario, right? Like, you've got a community of people that say, for the utilitarian, for the greater good, if everyone stays home, we can fight this thing. Then those people say, well, I can travel on the highway pretty easily with no traffic. I can get to this place that won't be crowded with people. I'm going to take advantage of the situation. And I think of only myself and not of others, right? And then if you obviously multiply that or scale that out to millions of people, you get a large enough group that warrants a governor to say, okay, no one can use the trails. No one can go to parks and beaches. These are all shut down. I'm even going to close parking lots because I don't want people gathering and more than a few people at a time. So it's, yeah, I mean, like, the stereotype is there of like, oh, I'm so, you know, self-involved or into myself, but it is kind of true in this scenario. It's like people just kind of disregard others or the well-being of a larger group, especially those who are like less capable or more susceptible or vulnerable, you know?
Yeah. It's a shame. So I wanted to switch gears a little bit and talk about like your experience, like how you're being affected personally. You don't have to go into too much like detail about like personal life, but just like how you are being affected and like how your life has sort of changed and what your story is in this context.
Yeah. So before all, you know, this stuff kind of went south, since moving to LA 2 years ago, I've been working from home. So a portion of this experience is not too uncommon for me, right? Like, I stay home, I work from home, go out to walk the dogs, I'll go out to lunch, kind of situation. But now, obviously, limiting those things, you know, I can still go to the grocery store, walk the dogs, you know, get a breath of fresh air. But I'm not able to do the other kind of social activities, right? Which it's not too bad for me. Because I think I've definitely replaced that, and also connected with other friends over Zoom and Google Hangouts and, like, you know, Slack groups and stuff like that, where, you know, some people I haven't talked to in quite a while or stayed connected with. And if I look at the silver lining, like, it has allowed me to strengthen or kind of redevelop those relationships with friends and loved ones and family members and stuff like that. Because I look at this and I'm like, this is a crazy social experiment we're in right now. And I don't know the next time a country or world will ever experience this kind of thing again. And it's shifting the way that we behave as humans, right? Whether it's work, personal, anything between. And I think for the better, for the most part. There's a couple stories I've heard that obviously aren't great in terms of the, digitized experience that we've kind of shifted into. But my experience personally hasn't been too bad. Like I said, like my life hasn't shifted too much. It's more or less the same outside of some of those things. And yeah, I would say that I'm not too hampered by it. Obviously, staying in your house for an extended period of time can be like mentally exhausting. And that's why I was mentioning earlier.
How long have you been quarantined?
So when the announcement came out, what was that, the 10th, something like that, early on, we had my girlfriend was working in Koreatown, and they had, as news began to roll out early on, they were like, okay, next week is optional. Then they were like, okay, next week and going on is mandatory. So we've more or less just been here. I've gone out obviously to walk the dogs and stuff like that. Or if I see another person, it's another person that I know is in a quarantine cell, to be like, you haven't left your apartment and you haven't, interact with other people. Great. I feel safe going out. If it's a stranger, not so much.
Yeah.
I mean, it makes the grocery shopping experience kind of interesting. Like everyone is so like, away, and they like I was in line the other day, and this woman, I think I was within the 6 foot range. It might've been like 7 feet. And she like looked at me and was like, and like shuffled over. And I was like, hey, good on you for taking this seriously. But I was also like, it's also really interesting to see like the human behavior and reaction to like kind of freak out, which is like, fear can be good and can be bad.
I've been watching stuff on like Netflix and stuff, and like people embracing on there. I'm like, no.
Yeah.
Like it's become so ingrained. I'm like, you can't, no, that's not safe. Don't do it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would say like the other thing too is I probably watch more TV, like shows and movies now, because you're like, okay, I'm in an isolated area and I can't do much more than read, play board games, play cards, meet with someone online or whatever. Which has been kind of nice because I've been able to catch up on shows that I'm like, I'll add that to the queue, to the wait list. I'll get back to it later. And then I find myself now being like, okay, let's just play it all. Let's just like watch everything and catch up to all the different types of content that's out there. So that's been kind of nice, and not having to worry about that. But for me on a work side, so that's like personally. On the work side, my company, which is based in SF, or like was based in SF, and I was working remotely, I discovered, I walked into a one-on-one with my manager, and now this is like public knowledge, but I walked into a one-on-one with my manager and saw the head of HR. And I was like, oh, okay. Well, I sometimes see them, they'll stop in a meeting and say hello and then leave. And then she continued to stay there longer. And I was like, oh, I don't know. Okay. And then they began to start talking about, they're like, so as you know, the company didn't hit their revenue numbers. We were short by 6 million. And I was like, oh, I'm going to be let go. This happened in the middle of February, but half of our team of our company is located in China. So it went from like, there are some cases, different places, districts are shut down, Chinese New Year. And then all of this kind of like, once that came out, it was like, oh, actually, this is much bigger than we anticipated. And there have been some kind of murmurs here and there of like true motivations or motives of the company making their layoffs. And one of them being they anticipated some of this illness to have an effect on production, demand, stuff like that. And so they were beginning to cut the fat where they saw it necessary to make sure that they recovered from the loss that they had the previous year. I mean, obviously don't anticipate that they saw it as a huge global kind of scale that it became. But that was definitely one of the things that came into play for me professionally. So like I was affected like an early wave of all of this that went through. And then obviously like, 3.2 million people applied for unemployment in the last week and a half. Yeah. And it's like, causes the system to go down. You can't get in touch with anyone. And then like now they're trying to handle the traffic. But from a personal side, just kind of like sum it up, personal side, like not too much is affected. I can see obviously some benefit from it outside of like seeing like what the cost is like mentally, socially, and trying to play catch up on a distant scale. And then professionally impacted on that just by the company making kind of logistic or management level decisions to say we're losing money and this might cost us more money, so we need to get ahead of it.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm sorry.
I mean, it is what it is. I think everyone
Yeah.
is in the collective boat. And
Yeah.
before, I think there was always a stigma of like, oh, I got laid off, I got fired, I'm unemployed, right? And if anything, that like stigma or that like negative kind of connotation for unemployment, yeah, it does suck, right? But I look at it and I say, well, you're not alone, right? You're with a group of people and you also share a commonality to the reason why you were let go. And in many ways, I see businesses, because I think the business owner, unless they're a terrible kind of person, I see the business owner as someone who understands, or they somewhat empathizes, right? Because if they were just to say like, well, everyone stays on let's say it's a hospitality, like a restaurant or something, right? Or a cafe or a coffee shop, and they say, well, I can keep you on, just can't pay you, or I can fire you or lay you off because of this, and you're able to apply for unemployment, right? And so in my mind, I look at it and go like, those places at least empathize for the person that's in the situation, because they're like, they can't control it, right? They can't keep it open, they can't make money, and if I don't unfortunately lay you off, then you won't see any benefit to getting unemployment insurance, right? So I kind of look at that and I say, it does suck, but the people that were laid off obviously are getting something, myself included, and it also, like I said, I think it kind of breaks away from the stigmatism from it, and kind of says like, yeah, we're all in the same boat. Not only are we trying to fight this like illness and stay in disease and trying to stay safe, but we also have a collective kind of topic to be like, oh, my company laid me off. I've heard some terrible horror stories, but I also heard some other ones where it's like, the manager has like, listen, managers who've like cried in front of their staff to say like, I can't pay you guys, there's no other way for me to do this, but at least this way you get something when there is nothing happening. So I tend to try to find the silver lining in situations, and that one I kind of interpret as that, right?
Yeah. Do you think that the wave of layoffs and the unemployment sort of adds to sort of gets people to take the whole thing more seriously, or do you think it just makes the situation worse?
I think to an extent, right, there's always going to be bad actors that are in the mix, right? Someone says, oh, well, I don't have a job. That gives me more free time to go do stuff like go hang out with a group of people, right? And so I think there'll always be people who are like, again, come back to this, like, if I get it, I get it. Doesn't matter, right? But I do see people who begin to look at the economic hardship that it can bring and say, oh, wow, this is something that originally was played down by the administration of the government to say like, oh, it's nothing serious. That's a China problem. That's a Italy problem. That's not an us problem. Well, it's not an us problem because we didn't have the numbers, right? We have the kids to test it, and we're also kind of reluctant to test people for political reasons. But I think for some people, they're like, yeah, well, I'm screwed. I don't have a job and I've got bills and no one's freezing my rent right now. So I'm going to have to pay, like I have rent due, what is today? The 28th. I've got rent due in 2 weeks. And I, like many others, are in this boat of like, well, the governor just got 5 large banks to freeze mortgage payments. So any person who owns a property, home, business, apartment complex, whatever, they don't have to pay a mortgage for however long. I think it was 90 days or something like that, maybe longer, depending on how long this goes. But then what about the person that's below them, right? Like, I see that as, if people lose their job, they don't have the financial resources or means to pay for rent, or they don't have the means to pay for groceries or essential items, right, during this time. Especially with people like raiding the shelves and taking the items that are specifically designated for people who are on food stamps, can't afford. Like, I don't think everyone kind of knows that, that aspect of it. And that it like, again, it's like a ripple effect through everyone and everything. And so, I've got a car payment on my car. I've got rent. I've got food. Fortunately, I live with a significant other, and, it's not just one person paying for stuff, it's 2. But I think, how does a single mother with 4 kids, or a parent, or a family who lost both their jobs, right? And now they've got to not only find a way to make money, but they also have to tutor their kids and homeschool them during this time, which I think a lot of parents have begun to understand the complexities or the difficulty of trying to teach a child, right? And much more of appreciation and respect for teachers now, which I've seen kind of on social media. But I think, yeah, I at least I hope the majority of people take it seriously by losing their main source of income. But there will definitely be people who just take it as well, whatever, right?
What was the turning point for you personally, where you were like, this is a flu in China, and then you were like, oh shit, this is a big deal?
I think when Italy began to rise up, right? Because it was, and I think whether it was because the news out of China was limited, because obviously there's a whole history of China and different areas kind of limiting or hampering the news and journalists, so it's they're not going to make numbers seem so bad. But I think when Italy started to accelerate in their kind of cases and deaths, and then also looking at it and be like, well, how did this happen? Oh, you guys treated the young people who were here first, not the older people. So the older people were dying, and those are the people who are getting sick. And now it's the whole country. I think when they started to shut down certain cities, I was like, yeah, this is getting pretty serious. Then they're like, okay, now it's more cities. Now it's the whole country. I'm like, okay, this is really hard, because you've got people that were traveling outside of this country, and you look at it. I mean, any movie Outbreak or Contagion, or anything else where it shows here's the worst case scenario if we don't address this in 3 days, 7 days, 1 month, right? And you see the virus, it's this is what happens when the zombie kind of virus spreads. Well, it's when you look at that and you say, well, this flight or these flights host this many different countries coming in as a hub, and this many people per flight, and those many people had layovers or interacted with other family members who then traveled, or businesses or whatever. You begin to imagine the scale at which you can go from a small area of Wuhan, China, to over 7 billion people, right? And it happens very quickly, especially if you just pass by, cough, breathe, talk, whatever, and it lives on something. You touch it, whatever it might be, and you have no idea initially, right? And especially because the news was oh, not a problem, this happens. It's always out of that market too, which I don't know how that keeps happening, but yeah, I think that was the point. It was around when Italy first started getting reports, and I was like, oh, this is becoming a much larger thing. Especially because Italy is a huge destination point. Rome, Vienna, Cinque Terre, which is small, and that's the other thing too, is I can only imagine how smaller regions that are unable to receive first responder care will will be able to kind of recover, right? You know, like you can only get in through train, or you can only get in through like a small little road. It's not like a main hub or a city where you've got it's considered kind of like a high traffic area.
Yeah, are
So
you glad that you're in LA as opposed to somewhere more rural or anywhere else in the country or another place?
yeah, I would definitely say that I'm grateful and fortunate to be in LA. Like I said before, I don't think that the response has been kind of as necessary, like as immediate as it should have been. But I am fortunate to live in a more developed city, right, in a more kind of hub. The downside is that, you know, LAX is not too far away, and that's another international hotspot where people are coming in. Um, you know, I know in some areas, like it was like Topeka, Kansas, had no cases. I don't know if that's still the case, but they had no cases recently. And like, you know, it's like, oh well, I've been there once. It's a relative low key town. You know, maybe living in an area like that would be nice. My accessibility to Wichita, Kansas, or Kansas City, you know, is only a couple hours away or whatever, and I'd be able to get the care I needed. So I could see like a like a benefit and a cost on either end. But I am happy to be living in LA only because if I need treatment or I need to be seen or something happens, like I live in close proximity to a hospital. Um, I I feel like the means of treating can be there. Now the question is like how long it would take to get seen, right? How long it would take to get treated and recover, depending on what stage I am, and you know, if I get sick. Hopefully I don't.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
I kind of was at odds for a whole day because I wanted to leave, but
right.
I thought I had missed my window, and I mean, I hadn't. I feel like I should have. They should have shut
Hmm.
things down way back then, but
Yeah,
and I almost cried. Honestly, I was just like, I need to get out of here. I don't want to go to LAX, and I don't want to sit in the car for 3 days. Like, what the hell am I going
yeah,
to do? Like, my family is on the East Coast, and so eventually, I was like, all right, well, I guess the smart thing is just to encounter fewer people. If I go to LAX, I'm going to be exposed to thousands of people immediately. If I
yeah.
drive, it's going to be maybe a dozen the whole time, and it
Right.
sucked, but that was the choice I made, and I'm happy to be here. There are no people, you know, there is a hospital down the road. And you know, I haven't left the house in probably 2 weeks.
Yeah, and that's good. I mean, like I can only imagine what would happen if you had, you know, gone to LAX and taken that flight, um, because, yeah, you know, one person takes to just like, you know, breathe in a direction. I think, despite it being an older movie, and I haven't seen it for a minute, but I remember watching it in health class my freshman year, like back in 2003. We watched Outbreak, and we were talking about like contagions and spreading of viruses and stuff like that. And there's one scene that always sticks out to me, and it's the theater scene. And it's where like the boyfriend comes in with the girlfriend, he coughs, he's like, oh, I'm just sick, whatever, he coughs, and then you follow like the particles as they just like spread in the theater, right? Everyone's watching a movie in the trailers, and it just like takes one cough to like land on someone's, you know, mouth, face, popcorn, whatever it is. And then now you've gone from one person to a theater of over 100 people, and those 100 people, it's kind of like the negative of pay it forward, right? Like you you give it to three people, those three people give it to their own three people, and it continues on and on and on. Almost like a, you know, multi-level marketing kind of scam. But that, in that movie, that visual, I was like, oh, that visual probably did it the best that I've seen. Is like, you may not think of anything of coughing or breathing, but like the particles or that come out then land somewhere, and something typically interacts with it, and then that continues to spread, and you may never know. And so like going to LAX thinking like, okay, cool, like I'm good, and then you get home, and then now to an area that no one really is around outside of your family. Now you put your family at risk, right? And you would have possibly not known that before, but then you're like, oh, you're, you know, patient zero in your cell, right? And
I kind
I
of
can
looked
only
at
imagine
myself
how many
that
other.
way. I saw myself as the problem in the situation. I was like, I'm coming from
Yeah.
LA. It's a hot spot. I do feel a little bit sick. Like, I'm the
Hmm.
problem here. So
Yeah.
I'm like, I don't want to go to LAX for both reasons.
Right.
I want to encounter nobody, basically, and that's what I
Yeah.
tried to do.
I know some people that have gone home and, you know, they've been fortunate to like have like a lofted space, like a lofted room or somewhere in the garage or in the basement or like in a side house or something. I know some people that when they've come back, they were like, I just leave the food out the door. I'm going to stay in this area for 2 weeks. If I don't show any symptoms, I'm good. Then I'll come out and interact with the family and like reintegrate myself with everyone else. But until then, I feel very uncomfortable doing that, especially because the whole family's here and I've got 2 elderly grandparents and this and that. So I definitely know other people who are in the same situation. Definitely fortunate to have like more space to isolate themselves, but went that approach too, where they're like, I feel bad, but I want to be here just in case, but I also need to distance myself at a relatively, shorter scale.
Yeah, well, at least there are some people taking this seriously, looking
Right,
out for
exactly.
others. And it is nice. I'll try to wrap it up a little bit, but Garcetti seems to be doing better at kind of directing people and not going along with what the president is saying. He's like, we're 2 months no matter what from this point on, right?
Yeah, I think, yeah. Because I mean, you look at Trump, right? Trump, again, it comes back to political reasons. You look at what his base is. His base tends to be, he's got evangelicals, you got other religious groups, Christians and things like that are like, oh, what's the biggest holiday that's coming up? Easter. Great. Okay. Easter's a time where you spend, kind of like coincidentally, it's Christ coming back from the dead. And he's looking at it as like, oh, there's an opportunity to be my own savior, very egotistical. I can save the country. I can bring it back from the dead. And I can make sure that this holiday that is very important to a voter base of mine sees this as a win, right? They'll always remember that Easter where they're able to spend time with their family. And that narrative is very dangerous because it's taking on, it's ignoring the health and the well-being of a greater population for a political gain. And I think that's where a lot of people don't see what's going on. He's like, he's got the highest approval rating right now he's ever had because people look at him and he's declared himself a wartime president and people see him as like, oh, he saved the economy and passed his bill and all this stuff. And it's just like a crazy narrative and it's dangerous for that reason specifically. And I think LA on top of SF specifically they seem to be the ones that are like taking the moves before any other city and they're doing it independently. They're like, we're going to freeze rent in Oakland. We're going to shut down subway transportation. That was just a few days ago. We're going to shut the city down. We're going to limit, this accessibility to these places, change the hours, do this, shut down this stuff. LA, not too long after to follow. And I think the mayor is doing a good job. His tone is definitely more serious, but I think that's because everyone hasn't been taking it seriously. And everyone is very like, oh, it's so, doom and gloom. But I think we've unfortunately gotten ourselves into a position where we have to take it seriously. And it's like, if you keep saying the same thing over and over again, then no one will. And I'm kind of thankful that he is.
Right. We were talking briefly yesterday about how I've got some feedback that was like, I'm being too negative, which I went back and like looked at and I didn't fully understand what they were talking about. But I mean, I feel like I'm just being real and presenting facts and a lot of them are not great. It's scary, but, and you said you could relate to that.
Yeah. And so my experience with that is like, I've been in threads, or like chats with other people, since this has started and people have been like, oh, I don't want to talk about it. Right. It makes me anxious, which I get like, it's a very serious topic and I'm glad that it's affecting you emotionally, that you're like, I'm overwhelmed, right? I feel sad or I feel bad or I feel anxious or whatever it is. I feel afraid. And that's good, right? Because if we didn't, then we would still be out and about, playing catch with random people or whatever it is. And I get people that are like, oh, I don't want to talk about this, or like, don't text me this after a certain time, or I'm watching the news too and I can't take it. but it's not like the news that I'm giving is, or I'm discussing or bringing up is anything that's like, you know, um, I'm not being like facetious. I'm not being negative with the news. It's just being real, right?
Yeah, you're not being
And it
alarmist.
comes right now. I'm not being like, oh, everyone, the sky is falling, but it kind of is falling, right? Like things are happening that are bad. I'm not playing Chicken Little, and I think neither are you. And I see it as it's like it's better to be educated on what is happening because there's a ton of false information that's going out right now, right? Oh, hey, you should take this malaria drug, right? That was one that kind of bent me the wrong way in terms of what Trump was saying. He's like, oh, it's going to work. It's going to work. I think it's got a great chance. It's going to work, right? It's like, okay, well, who benefits in this, right? Um, Politicians who have access. I mean, the whole like trading and selling of stock is just totally egregious. But it was like, use this malaria drug. It'll work. It'll work. Making these cocktails of drugs that people are like recommending are very dangerous because on their own they've been used, but in a combination they haven't been done in terms of a clinical trial. And so when people are like, oh, I don't want to, I don't want you to talk about it, I don't want to hear the news, it's like, well, if I don't say it, then someone else is going to say something that makes you feel better, like, hey, there's a cure and it's called this plus this. And as a result, people then go to their doctor and say, hey, I want you to extend compassion on me and prescribe me these drugs, right? Well, it turns out that the malaria drug plus the antibiotic, right, that combination together, there was a 30-person study done in China. A few of them, got diarrhea, started getting liver problems. One guy, his disease worsened, right? And the conclusive evidence was shown to say using this drug is not statistically significant to show that it performs better than just the current coronavirus care. And so I think that when people look at it and say, you're just being too real or this is too negative or whatever, I think it's people kind of not wanting to accept the truth of the situation.
Right.
And I get that it might sound terrible and bad because, it is, right? Like we got to be real on the situation. And it's for that very reason that people didn't take it seriously to begin with. And now we're here right now. And we're playing catch up and we're stressing the healthcare system, and people on the streets and other areas who are unhoused are getting infected, dying, elderly. Like it's a problem that will only worsen if we don't kind of talk about it. And especially when you have no one that's willing to make the president or the administration accountable or fact check, right? Because I saw it was like Seattle's NPR decided that they were going to not broadcast any of those anymore, and they were going to report on what they found the truth to be, because every press conference was another lie, another exaggeration of the truth, another part of them giving a reason why they didn't have enough kits available or why they didn't have enough masks available or whatever it may be. And it's for that reason that I look at it, I'm like, no, it's better to be truthful and it's better to be honest and know what's going on instead of getting some like viral email chain, no pun intended, of like someone telling you to go to your doctor or to go get prescribed this or to, or saying that something else is the cure or saying that, it actually caused from this. And it's like that whole narrative is dangerous from a health standpoint to a psychological standpoint, and it's just like, I don't know, it makes me kind of sad in terms of like how it's all being dealt with. But I don't find it alarmist. I don't find it being negative. I see it as being like, here's this really messed up situation we're in, and we're in it because no one else wanted to take it seriously. No one else wanted to talk about it. No one else thought that it was going to be a situation, and then it was. And so now here we are, and we've got people that are like LA mayor who's like, yeah, people are going to die. People are going to get sick. It's going to be worse than we thought. We're going to lock down for 2 months. That's the best case scenario we have right now. And then Gavin Newsom is like, yeah, 8 weeks. The numbers are going to be bad. We have a bed shortage. And until I see further data that indicates things are going on the up, like I have to make this decision for my Californians, you know?
Couldn't agree with you more. Yeah. And believe me, I'm happy to talk about like positive
Yeah.
stuff. Like if I was following that hydrochloroquine azithromycin, at first I was just like, how's an antibiotic going to work for a virus? Like that was my initial question. Like, how does this even work? But like, if it worked, great. You know, like I'm all for it. And
I know that Daniel Kim, you know, like the star from Lost, he had that cocktail of drugs from his doctor, and he went on and was like, "Oh, if I get this plus this, it fights off the upper respiratory lung infection. That's what the antibiotics for." I was like, "Okay, I guess all right." And he said he was feeling much better. Now he didn't really show signs early on; it was very light, and he got treated early. So it's hard to say, right? Like, did the drug help, or the fact that he got treatment help? The fact that he had he's rich and he has accessibility to better medical options, maybe. I don't know. Everyone's different, right? And everyone's bodies and chemistry react differently, and so it's like hard to say and kind of map it to a mass model of people and say this is the cure. Like there was somebody shared a tweet the other day from a doctor on Sean Hannity who gave the specific cocktail of how many milligrams per each drug should be given. And I was like, that type of information and spreading that kind of stuff, like whether it turns out to be true in the long run after the FDA and the CDC have run clinical trials, fine. But telling millions of people, especially millions of people who, you know, are similar to the couple that took the fish tank cleaning solution because they found the active ingredient, right? They were like, we're so afraid, but Trump's been telling us this is going to be the cure. And we read it and it sounded the same and we took it. And then now she unfortunately is a widow, right? And she's sick and she's in treatment. But Sean Hannity had a guy in there that was like, oh yeah, this is the treatment that I've been doing in New York. I would hate to see the side effects of that being like, oh, the people that initially showed to recover are now showing symptoms of something else, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm just like, we just have to be careful about the type of stuff that we're sharing right now. And I unfortunately feel like the administration obviously isn't doing a good job of it for a lot of reasons. And I think it does, unfortunately, like the weight bears on a lot of us to be like, what's actually happening? What is the truth of the matter? And I don't want to sugarcoat it, right? Like I would rather someone be blunt and honest with me and say, hey, this is what's going on. This is how it's all falling kind of down by the side. Than saying like, oh, well, you know, if you just do this or like keep a distance, it's like there's more that's at play here. And I think everyone obviously is trying to find the best way to kind of deal with it. But I feel like it's also like desensitizing certain people to be like, I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to hear about it. I don't want to think about it, which is potentially causing more harm. So
it's their choice, but I agree with you. All right, Gabe, Saturday afternoon, what would you be doing if you weren't in quarantine?
Oh, I would probably be out. I don't know. I'm like maybe at the park walking, like playing with the dogs, maybe doing something with my girlfriend, or the probably more likely of the scenarios would be I would be on set somewhere. I'd be filming some short film, or I'd be filming a sketch with my my group, or doing something film related. Those typically be my weekends, like Saturday or Sunday would be like, all right, I'm on set for a few hours, or you know, it's a couple days, something like this. But unfortunately, you know, I can't do that now. You know, that's requires a full crew, and I don't want to. Despite the fact that I still see stuff in LA where it's like, hey, we're casting this thing, come in to audition. It's shooting next week. And I'm like, how is this? What are you guys doing?
Yeah, thumbs down to that. As much as I want to be doing that right now,
right?
Not the time.
So yeah, probably acting or just like hanging out with my girlfriend and the dogs.
Great. Well, I hope that you can get back to that very soon. What good do you think is going to come of this situation?
I see, like I was saying earlier, like the silver linings, I see it so outside of being an actor, like my background is also in product design and just design in general. And so there's a bit of understanding like human psychology and behavior and like how people interact with certain products. And I look at this and I say, we are isolated within our homes, right? Very limited interaction with the outside world. Um, it's like, I think because of the limited interaction that we have with normal people, when we do see someone, at least in my experience so far, and I've heard a couple people that say like they walked outside for a walk, and typically someone will be like on their phone or something, but now like they walked by and they got a wave and a hello, right? Which is different than someone's normal experience, which I think is awesome, right? It's great. Which is like people looking at it and they're more grateful maybe, or of the opportunity to like see someone and like say hello at a distance, 6 feet, whatever, but still being able to like interact with someone. I see, like I mentioned earlier, there's been a growing development of connective kind of interactions online, right? I've had a ton of in my experience working, I've had a ton of like virtual conferences, over Zoom or Google Hangouts or whatever it is. And this moment in time takes me back to like Skyping with friends internationally who are studying abroad or whatever. And I look at it and I like, I've got another call later tonight. It's kind of like a happy hour with friends that are like all over the country. We had a birthday party last night on Zoom. Earlier this week, we had a chat with another group of friends. So it's, I'm going to wait for the siren.
I hear it. Yeah.
Okay. So I look at that and I'm like, this is cool. This is like, I hope that this type of connected, I don't even know how you would call it, but like this connected like type of interactive or like interaction between people continues beyond this, right? If it's on a digital, maybe it's like still reaching out to someone via text or call or whatever, or FaceTime. The other thing I'm looking at is from a technology standpoint, I've seen, there's an increase in adoption in mobile payments, right? Using credit cards, things like that. Because the fibers of bills have the potential to carry the virus on themselves. So people like use Venmo, use Square Cash, use this, like pay this way, which is pretty interesting to see. And it's also like I've seen the adoption kind of go up. Businesses who didn't offer delivery before are now offering delivery, right? Like I know that's a little thing, but if you've got your favorite restaurant and you always had to go in and drive 30 minutes or 45 minutes to get there, you now can experience from your home. But I look at it and say, oh, the adoption of people using the service, but also the adoption of businesses using those services, Grubhub, Seamless, Yelp, all of those things, I think is a good thing. But I think one of the biggest things that's going to happen, and I hopefully will stay, is the understanding that in the modern day workplace, people don't have to physically be in their chair and at their desk to get a job done and equal productivity, right? Input of sitting in a chair does not necessarily equal output of a good job. However, we found ourselves, because it's a very outdated kind of model, we believe that if you show up to work and you're there from 9 to 5, you take your hour break in the middle of the day, you have a little like water cooler chat or whatever, the perception or the idea that you're physically at your desk is one that person's doing a great job, right? However, I have fortunately been able to experience this from work from home. Is like I can go about my day, I can do my things, I can go to the doctor, run an errand, go to the grocery store, whatever, and still get work done. It just doesn't necessarily have to be 8 straight hours or 4 and 3 or 4 hours after that. It can be my morning's free, so I'll work a little bit. My afternoon's a little busy, so I'm going to go do this. And then later tonight, I'll put on Netflix and I'll work a little bit, and I'm able to finish out what the rest of my work is for the next morning, right? And I look at this and I hope that businesses begin to adapt this model and say, hey, we did this social experiment for 2+ months and the company didn't shut down. we actually are able to be more productive. People are happier. There's a greater understanding of work-life balance, right?
Overhead's
And I
probably
look at it
lower too.
exactly, right? You don't, I mean, my girlfriend was just telling me about a friend of ours who worked at a company in LA, and they're like, oh, our space is getting expensive. This whole thing that happened kind of right before it. Then as they were trying to figure out cost, they said, well, because of this whole thing, everyone works from home. And then they realized that the company will now be completely 100% remote going forward, because they're like, well, we can save money on an office space. No one really needs to be in there. We can continue to have meetings virtually. If we need to interact in person in the future, we definitely can if it's an offsite or something like that. But at the end of the day, like, we can get our job done from a cafe, our home, a shared workspace, whatever it might be. But I look at that and I say the work model that was once in place hopefully will be broken down to prove that you don't need to do what we thought you did to get the job done, right? And it breaks that mentality of like, well, as long as people see me here, then I'm doing my job, right? It's like, you get the work done, and you're able to go about your day and do the rest of the things that are like good for you. You want to spend more time with your family, your kids, whatever. You want to work after they go to bed, totally. But you're able to balance that to be happier, whether it's going on a hike, going to work out, hanging out with friends during the day, whatever it might be. So I think across the board, there's a lot of changes that are happening, both human psychology, behavior, technology. I think for the better, and I hope that they stay. I also, it's the unfortunate circumstance that people have to relearn to be hygienically like clean, right? I got to learn to wash my hands again, or I got to count the ABCs to 20 seconds or whatever it might be. And it's like, as adults, it's crazy that we have to relearn this. And I think over the next year, for however long the next few months this like develop or like continues, but over at least the next year, I see people taking it a little bit more seriously in terms of like being clean, washing their hands, sanitizing, not making sure to touch something, more conscious about touching your face, whatever. I hope that will continue. Knowing humans, once things begin to get back to normal and they say, I'm not sick or whatever, that might change. But I'm hoping that people continue to learn how to wash their hands or continue to do that. But I see the other things as positives. Like I said, I try to see the silver lining beyond like all of the bad that's happening and the serious talk that we have, is understanding like, okay, where are things better? Like, am I happier because I work from home and I spend time with my family and whatever? I'm able to do my things as I want. I'm able to chat with someone online or connect or whatever it might be. Yeah. And I hope that it does get better, and I hope that it continues, and I hope that we're able to better the lives of the people that have been affected. I know that financially we're not doing a great job in terms of the stimulus package, but I think beyond that, I'm hoping that this also does continue, develop, grow. We adapt as a society to take these things in that were once like oh, we don't do that, or we didn't do that, or we didn't think about that, or that wasn't the way that we did, certain processes or, procedures. But now, because of this experiment for the last, what will be potentially 2-3 months, we say, yeah, life goes on and we can continue to do what we were doing, but we just adapted the model a little bit.
Yeah. Good answer. Opposite question. What do you fear most happening?
Well, I fear that people, like, it's kind of like last point about the cleaning. I fear that people will think everything's okay after a certain amount of time and then go back to their old ways. I mean, I was at Griffith Park the other day walking through with the dogs, and I saw a guy use the restroom, and then he walked out, and then he pulled out his phone, and then he just continued walking. And the hand wash, the sink and the soap are around the corner. And I was like, really? You just went in there and you went to the bathroom? I don't know what you touched. You definitely touched the door. Now someone else is going to touch that. Hopefully they wash their hands. So it's like, even in this scenario of like, man, this is all screwed up, and we should be doing better, there's still bad actors out there, right, that don't care. And it's like, this one guy was, looked like he was 40. Another guy that was there looked like he was 60. I was like, dude, you both are, no one is safe. I don't know why you guys are not taking this seriously, but to them, they didn't do it. So I think that for at least a year, people look at it and they say, yeah, we got to do this. And then as time goes on, people might kind of fade in their regimen. I also fear that another situation that will go bad is we have a second wave, or we have a second wave that wasn't anticipated because we didn't accurately treat the first wave, right? So right now in LA, we're at a max, and we're trying to get in as many resources as possible. California, Washington, New York have all been designated as disaster regions, and we're getting the help from FEMA and the National Guard and stuff like that. But, it's one of those things where it's like, once the tests become available and more people starting getting tested, then the numbers will increase. Again, we're already number one. Italy just surpassed China in the amount of cases, and we've gone well beyond Italy. So, and we haven't even tested everyone because we're not testing asymptomatic people. We're only testing people who show signs. So it's like, the numbers will show up to be worse. I also fear that because of that, the length of time that we'll be in quarantine will be longer, right? It's at least 2 months until the data proves otherwise, and might be longer. I mean, Newsom and Garcetti were both like, don't set your hopes up too high because we might be going on beyond 3 months or 2 months. And then I have this fear as well from an economic standpoint, is that depending on how long this goes on, you see an effect globally, right? China, before, I was just reading about how China might see 10+% negative growth, because the people that would normally, the vendors that had agreed to purchase inventory or supplies or components, whatever it might be, are no longer able to get that because we're not accepting certain things in. 2, there's no one to sell it to. 3, businesses aren't open, so they don't have those. So it's like, it started in China and had an impact on the US to say they weren't making stuff. But now China is going back into production, and now the U.S. and other parts of the world are like, well, we can't, we're not accepting stuff. So it's like, I see it going on further than some people are like, oh, in a month it'll get back to normalish. And I'm like, I don't know what you're smoking, but that is not the case. Both from a health standpoint to an economic standpoint, that won't happen. It's going to take a while. The economy is going to take a while to stabilize. I also fear that one of the worst things I fear are the people that can't afford, like, they don't have the income or they don't have the means through unemployment to pay the rent to stay in their house, apartment, whatever it might be. And because of that, you'll have people who can't pay, right? They look at it and they say, well, this money, time value of money right now is more valuable to me to buy essential items and goods. I can't pay rent. I'm going to get charged fees or late or, interest or whatever it might be on my living situation. I hopefully doubt that landlords will evict people, but I have no idea. There hasn't been quite a freeze on that either in the state of California. I know other areas are, and
I thought there was an eviction ban. I could be wrong. I have that written down though.
I think that's LA specifically, or is that the whole state of California? I'm not too sure on that one. I just know that
be LA, yeah.
You can only prove up to you may not be able to evict. And then there's a whole, like, if you can prove that you were financially impacted from COVID-19, but that's only a certain amount of days, right? Boston, I think, is, a couple months, 3 months, something like that. Sacramento or LA was like 30 days. So it's like, I don't know how it's going to change, but I see, again, people arriving too late to the conclusion that we have to make more drastic measures on an economic scale. And people will have to decide what's more important, where I live or what I eat, right? And that's a very dangerous thing. And I could see that as things getting very tough, right? I can also see, like, not to say a movement or a revolution, but I could see, if you get a majority of people saying, no, I won't move out. Well, there's only so many police and county sheriffs that will evict people, right? Like, I'm hoping it doesn't come to that. I'm hoping that the city, the state, the country comes to a conclusion. If they can stop and suspend mortgage payments, that they can do the same for people who are paying rent. So I think it's only fair that way. But I just, my concern there is it takes longer than anticipated. Because you look at other countries and they're already doing that, right? They're paying more money, they're freezing payments, they're doing more for the good of the citizen than the U.S. is. And I think the U.S. late to the game, late to respond, didn't take it seriously, finally being reactive in how we respond, and we're not doing enough, right?
Not putting people first.
Yeah. Right, exactly. It's like, again, it's an election year, and that should not be the focus of what the motivation is here. Is it should be like people first. If you focus on people, then your political situation will benefit. Not to make it about that, but if you focus on how do I profit here politically or with my numbers, then you're going to lose a lot of people, and it's going to be worse than
Right.
if we did it.
It's going to be obvious that that's what you're doing, and it's grotesque.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. And it's disgusting. And like, this is another negative now, despite the fact that we're all going digital and we're having conversation via Zoom and connecting that way. I just found out, I don't know if I shared it with you, but Bird, the scooter company.
No, you didn't share that.
Okay. So they just laid off yesterday or 2 days ago, 400 people, right? So it's like a third of their workforce. And, makes sense, right? No one's riding scooters. They're not making money. They can't pay the people. That's business that's being impacted by the COVID-19. The way that they went about it is the really screwed up thing is, obviously the only way that you could have the conversation was online. So they had a Zoom call with all these different people. The kicker is that not everyone was on the call. So some people had to find out about the layoff via text when they were like getting shut out of their accounts. Wow. The double kicker is it was a pre-recorded message.
Oh no.
So these people showed up, and then then it's become this whole this PR game. The CTO came in and was like, oh, it wasn't pre-recorded. The person was on the edge of tears and blah, 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 and this and this. And someone else was like, I was on the call. It was robotic. It was pre-recorded. There was no, it's insane. So I was like, those are moments when I look at man, I get that we're in a bind right now, but understand the situation people are in. Don't be cold and jaded and say, well, got to keep the lights on, and in order to keep the lights on, we got to fire these people. But you know what? Let's make it efficient as possible, and we'll do it via recording. We'll play that thing, and then we're good to go. And that gets leaked, and now everyone is telling their side of the story, and it's like that's what happens when people just don't put people first, and understand and empathize.
This is a good time for compassion right now.
Yeah, exactly.
It goes along. And let's let the people know in LA we have scooter options.
Yes, we have other things. You also can just walk. You can take a city bike if you want. It doesn't have to be all scooters. But I look at that and I'm like, that's probably one of the worst things I've heard so far in all of this. Is it's just deciding that one thing is more important than people, putting basically profit over people. And
yep,
we're all in the same situation. We understand that businesses are closing and they're hemorrhaging cash because nobody's buying that product. But you have to understand where that other person that you're about to impact or affect is coming from. Because like, if the tables were turned, would you want the same done to you? Probably not. Now, maybe you might be in a better position because you're like a CEO or a CTO, but still, you at one point were probably like this person, maybe.
Yeah. Well, so I went to school for public health, and I can say definitively that the biggest obstacle to health is money and profit.
Mm-hmm.
Like hands down, people choose money over health or other people almost always in this country. It's crazy.
I mean, look at what's happening with the ventilator situation, right? Trump says, "Oh, you know what? Governors, figure it out, right? Like, you're able to find a way to get those machines for the hospitals and for the clinics or wherever you need them." And the manufacturers are like, "Yo, we're ready. Like, we can ramp up production. We can get this thing going. We just need an order from the government." And then the government says, "Okay, now we're going to be partnering with private companies on upping the production of masks, ventilators, other machines, stuff like that." And then I just saw yesterday, 2 days ago, they were like, "Oh, the cost of these machines is way greater than we thought. So we're going to go back on that deal." And it's like, again, if you anticipate this to be a costly endeavor, and it's a benefit to treating. Now, obviously, putting someone on a ventilator has a myriad of side effects, right? Vocal cord straining, physical therapy, muscle atrophy by keeping someone in a state. There's a lot of things that can happen. And it's not like it should be the last resort, unfortunately, because you don't want to then have the cost of all of those hospital bills after you get out, right? Which is, again, our healthcare system is totally ass backwards. And so it's like, if you anticipated what the cost was going to be or how expensive it was, I mean, you had to have some idea when you were discussing with those companies to say, like, if you make this much, how much will it cost? And then you go back to Congress and the Senate and say, this is how much it's going to cost. Please build this in to the package so that we can make sure that we have enough supplies and resources to treat this, because we project the numbers to be so high and this many people need to be treated. It just, I don't know, it seems common sense, but unfortunately I feel like we are run under a group of people that don't put people first, react to problems, ignore them, and also have I think the banner statement across this whole thing is when Trump says, "I don't take responsibility at all. It's not my fault." And that's the worst thing you can say. And very much a very privileged kind of thing to be like, "Not my problem. I didn't do it. It's all from China," which is like, that's a terrible narrative as well.
Yeah. No one's blaming him for the virus. It's just everything else.
There's a video online, and I can send it to you, but there's a video online of the timeline of events of how he was like, people would ask about the virus since the beginning of January.
Oh, I saw this. Yeah.
And the narrative was like, "Oh, it's not a big deal. It's not our problem. It's not over here. We've got no numbers, zero, the greatest," right? And then as time goes on, the cases begin to increase and increase. Then you have deaths that also come up, and like it's like, not a problem, not a problem, not a problem, not a problem. And then, it was like a week and a half ago, a week and a half ago, he has a press conference where he says, "I've always known it was a pandemic. I always knew this was going to be serious. A global pandemic. Like,
he's good at this stuff."
Right. He's good at this stuff. Right. And then he also says, the other thing is, like, there was a moment when I was like, man, the gall of you to say this right now. He looks around for like acknowledgement to the group. It was like Pence and Dr. Bricks and all that stuff. And he goes, "I think we knew that this was always the plan forward, right?" And everyone else is like, I mean, what are you gonna say? No? Yeah. The only person that's like honest is Dr. Fauci. That guy gives like zero fucks. He just says what he wants. And because, I mean, like, he's in a very unique position where he has to say the truth, right? If he doesn't, people's lives are at stake. And you don't fire a doctor who's handling this either. So he's like in a very unique position. I think he's also he's paid over $500,000 a year. Like he's the highest paid person in government. And I think rightfully so, right? He's handled previous epidemics and pandemics, and he's the only person that knows how to handle it really in his experience.
He's an important guy. Yeah.
Right. And so that's someone that you just can't like fire, because that definitely will send ripples throughout confidence of people, the market, citizens, whatever. So I think he's in a very unique position where he's had to do fact checking in interviews, and he was like, yeah, that was never the thing. I don't know why they said that. That was never the case. Like, and I'm grateful for someone in this administration who can do that. They've obviously limited his public communication now, but at the same time, when he does talk, he's just like, I'm not getting anyone's hopes up. I don't know what to tell you. We're treating it. We're trying to do it as quickly as possible, but this is what's happening.
He's using evidence, and he's the only one.
Exactly. Yeah. And I appreciate the evidence-based approach, because everything else is anecdotal, and that is a dangerous thing.
Right. I agree with you. All right, Gabe, you're down to your last question.
Okay.
This is for all the money. How long are you personally prepared to quarantine? When are you going to hit your breaking point?
Is that mentally, or is that like my supplies?
Whatever you think. Whatever you want to say.
Well, I think supplies wise, I'm fine. I actually just did a run yesterday at Costco for like eggs and some other things.
Okay.
So I think in that regard, we're fine for 5, 6, 7 weeks out. I don't know. I mean, like, I think I'm at a different advantage than other people, because I've worked from home for 2 years. The only change in the dynamic now is that I can't go out and see a movie, or I can't go to the bar and have a drink with you or other people, right? So I think that changes things. I personally have a tendency to be able to do the same thing for a long period of time. Like I can eat the same meal over and over again, and I won't get sick of it.
Yeah.
So I think that I might have an unfair advantage in terms of like what my breaking point is and what I'm acceptable to take. But that's also because I think I have a different kind of perception of the situation, right? Like I've set an expectation, and I'm just trying to be real with myself, like you are, right? And so I think I'm prepared to go as long as possible. I'm fine to go 2 months, I'll see what happens at 3 months, but I think at least for the next 2 months, I'm fine, no issue. As long as I can continue to like make content every day here in my house or whatever, or outside, then I'm fine.
Great. I'm with you. I feel almost guilty about it. I feel like Pauly Shore in Jury Duty, where he's just like, no, let's keep this thing going. Like, I'm gonna hold out if that's okay.
Yeah, I can imagine some people who are like, and I've seen online like, I'm so antsy, I gotta go do this, and it's like, do what you got to do within a safe distance, keeping yourself safe as well as other people. But I can imagine, people are already like, I've seen the memes out there where like someone's like, day 3 of quarantine, no sports. I just found out my favorite color is green. What the hell is green? It's like people making fun, and it's like, I think in it, yeah, I know. And I will say this, I think in a time like this, the ability to escape into various forms of content, not in an addictive format, but I think like watching a show or a movie or spending time with another, significant other, whatever, or like, especially humor and comedy, and finding the funny or light kind of hearted approach to something while still taking everything else seriously, I think is very important, right? And I think comedy more than now is something that will become so important.
So you're saying we'll have jobs when I get back, when this whole thing's over?
Oh yeah. We'll see how the industry recovers. But yeah, I think you and I, like you said, I think in a similar situation where it's like we can hold out for as long as we need to, and we have things to kind of keep us busy creatively, mentally, physically, whatever it might be, until we get to a point where they say quarantine's over, and then you say, okay, I guess I'll go back to normal life.
All right, man. Well, this was great. Thank you so
I really
much.
enjoyed this. Thank you for having me.
Me too, man. thank you to Gabe and to talking all things California and coronavirus and everything else we went over. We went over a lot. Thanks for putting on the suit. I appreciate that. Stay safe.
Spent too much time in California. Now I'm in Pennsylvania.
Pennsylvania.